what's it costing us to prevent the spread of COVID? And it's interesting you ask this question because just this afternoon I was updating figures on my analysis of that. And there's two things we got to look at here. One is, how many lives did the lockdown save? And that's an important question, but also an important question, what did the lockdown cost us? And in terms of, chronic, not just the chronic unemployment and businesses going bankrupt, but also, increases in drug abuse and domestic violence and suicides, all of this stuff. So what was the benefit? What was the cost?
Right.
And I think it's going to be several years before we have a solid handle on the answer to that. But what I can say is that the numbers are close enough that it is not entirely clear that the lockdown was a good idea. On the whole, yes, it had good parts to it and it had some good outcomes, but it's not entirely clear that it was worth the cost.
Right. As far as death toll and all the things that you just described, as far as those things rising.
In terms of all those things, the big thing there, of course, is what it did to the economy. And I have to tread very cautiously here, because people will say things like, well, you can't equate lives to dollars, and that's what I'm doing, and therefore I'm evil, and we should ignore all the economists, right? But I have to say, well, hang on a second, because what we're really asking here is, we took a certain amount of resources and we devoted those resources to fighting COVID in the form of lockdown. Would those resources have saved more lives if we had put them towards something else? And if the answer there is yes, then the Economist would say that was not a good use of our resources, the lockdown and all of this. And I could give you a example of this, and people don't like this example, and I'll tell you why they don't like it after I've given it to you. But we lost, since the start of COVID, so we're talking 18 months roughly, 700,000, give or take, Americans died of COVID. Now, over a typical 12-month, not 18-month, but 12-month period, around 650,000 Americans die of cancer. And they die every single year. It's not a one-off thing, right? And people will look at that and they'll say things to me like, well, you can't compare cancer to COVID because COVID's an infectious disease, cancer isn't. Okay, but that argument cuts both ways, because given that COVID is an infectious disease, there's the opportunity to develop herd immunity to it.
Right.
There's no opportunity to develop herd immunity to cancer.
Right.
And if you just look at the numbers, I mean, we're losing 650,000 people a year to cancer, year in, year out, every single year. Now, take what COVID cost us, and I don't know what COVID cost us, but I can look at Congressional Budget Office that has estimated this, and they put the estimate somewhere around, give or take, $15 trillion. Yeah, 15 trillion. Yeah.
That's half the budget, or a deficit, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a gargantuan sum.
Wait,
and
so
even if
break that down, hold on. $15 trillion for what? Like all the resources?
Yeah. Now it's an opportunity cost. So the way you would think of it is, this, had we not had this lockdown, over the course of the next decade, we would be cumulatively $15 trillion better off than we will be, given that we did do the lockdown.
God.
And again, these numbers, we don't know a lot at the moment. And even if the CBO is off by a factor of 2, still, it's not 15 trillion, it's 7 trillion, right? It's still gargantuan, right? So I come back to my thinking as an economist about the cost, the benefit of the lockdown. And I say, okay, suppose we had taken that $15 trillion, whatever it is, and instead of locking down the economy, we invested that same amount of resources into finding a cure for cancer. We could have expanded the NIH and the NCI, National Cancer Institute, National Institutes of Health. We could have expanded their budgets 300-fold.
Whoa. For
that same amount of money. Now, for a 300-fold increase in their budgets, they would have found a cure for cancer within the next year, right?
Right.
And that would have saved how many lives? Not 700,000 that we saved with the lockdown, but 650,000 times the number of years we can expect to wait until we otherwise get a cure for cancer.